Well, a pleasant good Friday morning to you folks. It is a beautiful sunlit morning, and the markets are kind of wobbling around, but there is a little green on the screen. Let's take a look at the overnight markets as we do each and every day, thanks to Premier Cooperative. Let's talk with Premier Doug Croft. Good morning to you, Premier Doug.
Yeah, good morning.
Well, as you said in some of your opening comments on your website, another USDA WYXY report has come and gone, and not a whole lot of shaking.
Yeah, we had a lot of anticipation about the report yesterday. It came out, basically as expected. A little bit of bearishness towards the wheat, but corn and beans, they weren't bullish numbers, but they were as expected, kind of in the market. On the bean side of things, just a couple things that people looked at was the crush was increased by 15 million bushels. And they dropped exports by 25 million bushels. So the net carryout was pretty much unchanged. It's a little bit less at 585 million bushel, a little bit higher, 585 million bushel, and then the exports they left them unchanged on soybeans for next year. And the Argentina crop, they lowered their production a little bit, but they left the Brazil crop the same. And then in corn, it was basically the same thing, just a few minor changes. We did lower ethanol production by usage by 50 million bushel, which was expected. But one thing that was interesting, they did lower production by 47 million bushel. And I think that was largely due to some of the resurveys that they did in North Dakota and a few other areas. So the net effect of those two was basically an unchanged on this year's ending stocks. And they made basically no changes to next year, so early for that. So really looking at a big carryout again.
Yeah, that's true,
Yep.
and we've got quite a bit of old stock still on hand, but exports seem to be ramping up. Notice China is not only importing grains and foodstuffs, but I noticed a report as well as you that China is now importing an awful lot of U.S. crude.
Yeah, China is going to be importing U.S. crude oil here in July, and maybe a record amount of that for them. And it's kind of interesting when you look at how things have changed in the energy policies and how we're now exporting a fair amount of crude oil. At the same time, it's a world market, and we're exporting to China. At the same time, we're importing some crude oil from that was loaded on ships over a month ago when we had those low prices in crude, and the refineries took advantage of buying some of the negative price crude oil, bringing it to the U.S. So it's always a world market on the ins and outs, especially in the energies.
Well, and you make a good point there, Doug, and you just went right in and just dovetailed right into some of my thoughts is that the price of grains, the oversupply, and yet we're importing grains from other countries and livestock, cattle and hogs and pork and poultry, they're still being imported into the United States. I haven't quite figured that one out. But another thing, Doug, is, the wheat took a pretty good tumble. Not that there's an awful lot of wheat in the Ag Force area, but, I got to looking around and some of the crop reports from worldwide out of the WYXY report, France, the Ukraine, the Baltic Sea area, and they said, well, there's just an overabundance of wheat. But you look at the overall countries, France's wheat and barley is, 50 to 55% good to excellent. The Ukraine wheat crop is in the 50 to 55% good to excellent category. That's not very good, actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of, wheat is the staple crop always, and it's grown pretty much all over the world, where corn and soybeans are, mostly in the North and South America. But when you look at the wheat production as a general rule, yeah, the ratings are down. However, you look at some other countries like India, Australia, and maybe even China, their crop has improved a little bit here. So kind of offset a little bit of that, I think, as you look going forward. Was surprised to see that they didn't reduce some of the European crops more than they did.
Exactly. Well, I guess the next thing is the stop off at the end of June, and that's usually a market maker, because we look at, supposedly we get planted acres, and we get probably a little bit more interest now going into kind of a dry spell across the mid-belt of crop conditions. So I guess we need exports, and we need I guess the rest of it, we're just looking at the outside interest, right, Doug?
Yeah, basically. I mean, this is the time of year too when the market tries to, like you said, establish that weather premium or that weather market, and usually it's an opportunity, something to look at from the producer side of things. The markets aren't great pricing, but this is, this month, the next 2 weeks to 30 days is usually when we'll see historically or chart-wise see our highs in the marketplace for new crop. So maybe keep a look at those opportunities, and then of course we'll be watching the weather as well as the exports going forward into that June 30th planting report to see what acres actually got in the ground.
Exactly. Well, we didn't talk long enough to get the new crop corn into the green, but let's go ahead and take a look at those numbers from Premier Cooperative. Our good buddy Premier Doug Crop. Doug.
All right. July corn is up 0.75 cents at 330.5. New crop December corn is down 0.5 cents at 343.25. Looking at the new crop 21 December, it's down 0.25 at 374 even. July beans are up 1 penny and a quarter at 867.25. New crop November beans up 1 penny, 877.75. The wheat's off a little bit more again today, and we have July wheat down 3.5 at 495.75, and December wheat's down 3 cents at 512.5.
Very good. Doug Crop from Premier Cooperative. By the way, Doug, you see the disparity in the trade overnight, the corn versus the soybean volume?
Yes, definitely. We saw some interesting, decent amount of volume in the corn, but soybeans and then wheat has some decent volume for wheat too, but soybeans kind of quiet.
Yeah, absolutely. Doug Crop from Premier Cooperative, and Doug can be reached throughout the corporate trade day hours at 217-355-3369. That's 355-3369, or you can always go to their website, premiercooperative.net. Hey, Premier Doug, you have a Premier Friday.
Yeah, thank you, and you do the same.